Shall I start? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning. Thank you everyone for joining this seminar for KICT Intellectual Talk Series 03-2022 today. For information, KICT is regularly conducting the KICT Intellectual Talk Series to promote the research works or products produced by KICT research units. Alhamdulillah, today we are blessed with a speaker from Germany, Mr. Björn Crüts, that has collaborations with KICT Research Unit 2, Pervasive Computing for Brain Development Group, PCBBG. Inshallah, today we have audiences physically in this KICT conference room and also on an online platform, which is Zoom. And this session is streamlined on the KICT Media YouTube channel. Before we start our session, let's recite the Kitab Al-Fatihah. I am Dr. Raini, your moderator for today's event. Before we start, there is some information about this seminar. For both the physical and online audiences, please put your mobile phone in silent mode and mute your microphone during the sharing session. We will have around 1 hour presentation from the speaker, including a question and answer session. If you have any questions, you can certainly ask them here in this KICT conference room, or you can just write them in the chat box area. It can be during or after the presentation. Don't forget to record your attendance. For the audience in this conference room, you can scan the QR code or sign your attendance on the attendance sheet. And for the online audience, the attendance link can be found in the chat box area. Alhamdulillah, we are honored today to have Mr. Björn Crüts, a neuroscientist and the founder of Stroke Coach, give a talk on QEEG in European community post-COVID. First of all, let me share a brief profile of our speaker. Mr. Björn Crüts has obtained an MSc degree in Movement Sciences Rehabilitation and did a few years on PhD Neuroscience at Imperial College London. After that, he set up the Stroke Coach company. Stroke Coach develops hardware and software for EEG, QEEG, and Neurofeedback that got implemented in the networks of centers in the Netherlands and Germany. Currently, Stroke Coach only focuses on software development, not hardware anymore. It also shifted from psychiatric patients to neurological patients and gives more focus to coaching to boost the motivation of patients. Stroke Coach also offers aggregated courses for therapists. The network is now fully blended care. Patients are treated in centers and at home in the Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland. Stroke Coach provides data-driven therapy, but with a strong focus on patient experience. The centers are ISO certified, which means all interventions and measurements are standardized. Because of this, Stroke Coach has a strong collaboration with universities in Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands, of which the clinical data are being used for scientific research. Last but not least, Mr. Björn co-founded the Department of Medical Technology at Zurich University in the Netherlands and assisted in multiple brain-related studies. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Björn to start the session. Please welcome.
Thank you for your kind introduction. If it's okay with you, I stand up because I always present standing up. It increases my alertness and hopefully also your attention span for this coming hour. Also, welcome to the people online. I hope you understand my Dutch accent in my English, but I'm not using any fancy words, so it will be okay. I first try. This works. Check. Otherwise, I just. So that's okay. I'll just press. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So in the next hour or so, I want to share with you how it all began. Why we did EEG measurements and the treatments that follow. It's called neurofeedback. And then I want to tell you a little bit about where we are progressing. It's going from very technological things to more blended care, as I call it. I'm going to explain what blended care is. And then COVID hit, also in Europe, as it hit here. And it's still hitting us a little bit. It's going to hit us again. And we learned a few important lessons, and I want to share the lessons with you. I hope everyone can hear me okay, also see me online. I'll check if I'm in the camera, I think so. So the whole talk is centered around EEG, and EEG is the measurement of brainwaves. There's a lot about it to say, and I will speak more about it. I'm not going into the technical details about EEG, but I want to spend a little bit more time because it is a technical department, so to speak, information technology. I want to speak more about the clinical side and the why. Why do we do these measurements and how we can implement them? And so it's all about measuring brainwaves. And what I'm going to tell you is that it doesn't really, it's very important to put the brainwaves into context so that we add some meaning to the brainwaves and we can use them in our everyday clinical life. Because as you know, if you measure brainwaves, that's what we get. We get a lot of signals going up and down, and we have to make sense of them and relate them to something. So in our purpose is to have an impact on patients' lives. And so we have to make sense of these brainwaves and use them in a way that patients can get better. So I'm from the Netherlands. This is a picture from a few years ago. And the Netherlands is quite a modern country. But we still have windmills. They're just for tourist purposes, by the way. But we still have them. And I want to show you this old picture because although it's a very modern country, we still have very old-fashioned rehabilitation techniques. So if you go to acute medicine and oncology and cardiology, it's very, very high-end, very modern. But if you go into rehabilitation, if you have chronic diseases, it's quite old-fashioned, so to speak, and also in our surrounding countries. And that's what I want to talk today. How can we use modern technology that you know from university, that we know from research, how can we implement it in a kind of old-fashioned clinical setting? And you may have heard from all kinds of startups, and they have all these disruptive technologies. And but what we learned, also in Germany mainly, is that if you come with a disruptive technology, that nobody accepts. So the health insurance companies, they won't pay for it until it's clinically proven, which is a very long process. And also physicians, they're used to old-fashioned stuff. They're, for example, used to looking at EEGs with their eyes. They're not used to quantification of EEGs. And the title of the talk has the word QEEG, and the Q stands for quantitative. So we calculate information out of the brain signals, and that's new for clinicians. They still look at the signal, which is not very reliable, but we still do it in the Netherlands and Germany, so a little old-fashioned. And I want to start with a story, how we can do something remarkable in an old-fashioned country for rehabilitation. So we had a woman. Can we put this away so we can see the slide a little bit better? I think it's going to be okay. Can you see the slide? Is it okay? I'm going to talk about it anyway. I can't read the comments, so if there are questions, can you read the comments for me? If there are questions in between them. And also a little bit taking care of time, because we don't see the time. And if we don't take care of time, we'll sitting here tomorrow morning and have breakfast together, because we can talk about it all day long. And this is about a woman who had a stroke when she was 19. She had multiple strokes. And I use stroke as an example because it combines mental and physical problems and can make the case for other diseases. And we also specialize in stroke, besides other psychiatric diseases. She had multiple strokes when she was 19 years old, which is, when you're so young, it's often a malformation of blood vessels in your brain. And she had a stroke, and she suffered from it, and she had huge problems. And we met her when she was 33. She actually came with a totally different problem, a foot problem in her ankle. And then the physical therapist asked me, could we provide a special treatment for this woman? Because she still has problems standing up. She couldn't stand on one leg, and very important, she couldn't cycle. And in the Netherlands, if you can't ride a bike, you have a huge problem because everybody rides a bike to work and to school. And what we did is, for the first time, we combined, this years ago, we combined brain measurements and neurofeedback, which is a treatment where you condition your brain waves. We're going to talk about it a lot next week. So we use high-end measurements of brain and muscle activity together with old-fashioned techniques from rehab, but based on evidence. So she trained for a few months every day, her brain, her body, and so forth. And what happened was very, very remarkable. So first we did EEGs before and after the 3 months. And remember, this is 14 years after her stroke. So she was in a very chronic stage. There were no improvements anymore. And if you look at the EEG, just as an example, as I say, we're not going to go into technical details, but here you see always two signals compared to each other. The upper two are left and right frontal cortex. Then we have left and right central, parietal, and temporal and parietal. And what you see is, even if you don't know anything about EEG, you see that the white signals are a little bit bigger. So these are slow waves, big waves, and that means that's the side where her stroke was. You get very slow information processing, a lot of problems in your information processing, cognitive problems, and also motor problems. So we showed her these signals and gave her positive feedback every time the brain increased its activity on that side. So that was our therapy for a few months, and she was trained like a professional athlete in these 3 months. So what happened is she got on national TV in the Netherlands. We're a small country, but we still have national TV for 17 million people, because she was able to cycle again, ride a bike again. She could stand on one foot. She got a job. Her mental capabilities improved, and it was almost a miracle. Her name was Emmy Lou, and we can share all her information. She was in the newspapers, and it's called the success of brain training. So we were very successful, not just because of neurofeedback and QEEG, but because we used the evidence from science and we implemented an approach where we did pre and post measurements, and where we used the measurements and the evidence to improve and have an impact on her life. So that was the beginning of something remarkable, I think, because then we looked more into this is the most complicated slide, by the way. The rest will be more simple, but we looked at what is now the current problem. Because we have more than 2,000 studies on stroke each month appearing on PubMed, and a lot of evidence how you can use measurements and technology like EEG, QEEG, and neurofeedback to improve patients' lives, but nobody does it. And that's why I had the slide from the Netherlands from years ago. When we do rehabilitation in stroke or depression or ADHD, it's very low tech, it's very low intensity. They only train when they're with you or when they're with a clinician. And it has low impact if we measure the impact at all. So we have to change this, because it's a big problem. Because, as I say in the lower end of the slide, if you look at science, there's so many things we could do to improve the lives of these patients, and they need it. They have a full range of small problems to huge problems after stroke, after depression. So why is it that we have this problem? And the problem arises, by the way, if patients go home. So to take a stroke, the patient journey is you go to the stroke unit. Their central purpose is to have you survive, so you stay alive. After 1 or 2 weeks, you go to the rehabilitation center, and after a few weeks there, you go home. And that's where when the intensity drops, when the impact drops, when it's not really scientific driven, you get a few therapists at home, or you go to the therapist once a week, maybe twice a week. You don't do anything at home because they have motivational problems because of the stroke. And so we have a big problem. So, as you may know, this is not only the case with stroke. We see the same with people with a depression, with burnout, with chronic stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, all these chronic conditions where the brain, but also the body is always involved, because it's a combined system. We see that we have very, very low impact. So you can go to a physician if you have a burnout, or if you have anxiety disorder or stress in the Netherlands or Germany. If you go to a psychiatrist, they give you medication. That's the first thing they do. And it's not evidence-based, because we don't have really evidence what medication is useful or not. So it's trial and error. And we have lots of studies showing that we can do a difference. So we want to change this. And as I'm going to show in the final slide, we did it the Dutch way. We just started. And so what happens? That's what you do in the Netherlands. And we learned a lot, because we made a lot of mistakes, a lot of assumptions. And the lessons we learned, even also when COVID hit, I want to share with you. So maybe you can use it as a take-home message. So what we ended up doing is what's called blended care. And I can really assure you that this is the next thing, the next future, at least in Europe. I'm not really familiar with the Asian side of things, but in Europe, blended care, where we take the best of both worlds. And both worlds, I mean conventional therapy, where I see you, you come into our center, and we treat you, and we talk to you, and give you medication and treatment. And blended means that the other side is when you're at home, we don't leave you alone, we are in touch with you. We measure you at home, it could be measurement of your brain, of your blood pressure. You do neurofeedback treatment, so you train your brain at home, and we see what you're doing. Are you doing it? How are you doing it? Should we motivate you? Can we help you? So we are there for you. That's the message we want to convey to patients. If you leave our center, our medical center, you're not up to yourself, but we are there with you. That's what they call blended care. We blend the digital and the actual visit to a center. And we're a big fan of it, and I'll show you later why. And to do this, we build a virtual clinic. Okay, I hear a little peep. Is that okay for you? It's not too loud? It's probably because I'm running around. So we have a virtual clinic. We have 3 sites. So if you come into our center with a stroke or depression or ADHD, we talk to you, and it's a very human interaction, of course, and we listen to you. And when you go home, you're still with us, as I said before, but we have a dashboard. You see in the upper left corner, upper left, we have a dashboard where a therapist sees his or her patients, what they're doing at home, how they're doing when they're going back to the clinic. So it's a dashboard where we see them. And in the dashboard, we can activate exercises like neurofeedback or even training techniques after stroke or depression in order for you to get active. And we push it to an app. So the patients are connected to us with an app. And it's not a static app. The content is based on your first visit in our center, where we say, okay, this is you, we profile you, we say these are measurements we've done, this is the outcome, and this would be a good program for you. And we measure the effects of everything we do at home and in the center, and it's stored in the lower part in a database. And this database can be anonymized, and is used by universities now in Switzerland, in the Netherlands, and in Germany to publish results that come out of it. We don't need to be part of the publications, but we don't want the knowledge to get out there so other people can have the experience or can use our data to improve patients' lives. So this is our virtual clinic. We're now this year expanding it into a real virtual clinic. So you go to our website and you see a ground plan of an actual clinic, and you can click on a room and have contact to us, see your data, go to our library with publications, and it's going to be tested with patients. So we know that patients can click on it and get information. So it has the same ground plan as our actual clinic. And this is what it looks like with pictures. So blended care means on the left, you are in our center. We do a measurement of the brain in this case. So we have a headband, we can show you later. And when you're at home, it's on the right-hand side. Even if you have problems with your headband or your brain measurement for your treatment, you can, via video call, as we do right now, right? I'm also online with you on video. You can call your therapist and they help you doing the measurement. And then it's okay. We have videos for them, we have instruction. And this is how we work. So you're always connected to us, even if you're not in the clinic. What's very important is that we've seen you once. So you want to see your patient once, and then you're connected, and it increases the compliance. So we have multiple centers. This is, if you're not familiar with the topology, this is Germany. I'll use my little thingy. This is Germany. It's huge. And this is the Netherlands. It's small, but very, very nice. You should come and visit. And this is Switzerland, also small, even nicer, because of the mountains. And we have centers, and we have also hospitals that we collaborate with. And we have not one big hospital. We have a lot of small centers. The centers, I have some pictures for you, are also designed to make you welcome. So they're designed like a living room, and you can drink coffee, you can have a good time. And we now ISO certified. We just did our pre-test. That means it's a special certification for medical institutions called 15224. It's part of the ISO 9001 for people who know a little bit about it. That means in every center, the order of things and the processes are very, very structured. So everybody gets the same pre-measurement. They get the same post-measurement. They get the same treatment. So it's personalized treatment, but the processes are structured. That means that the database is also very, very structured. And I showed you the picture of the Netherlands in the 1800s. That is a big problem still. There are no structured databases in Europe for rehabilitation, not one, not a single one. So we're the first ones to structure the data so that universities can see patterns. And we do see patterns. I want to share to you a few of these patterns. So this is what a center looks like. You see, it's very cozy. We take a lot of effort in design. We have designers that design our webpage. They design our information material. They design our centers. And if you come to Germany and Netherlands, you're welcome to visit, because it's all centered around the patient experience. So we try to maximize the patient experience from the moment they call us until the moment they leave after a year. We typically have intervention periods of 1 year. So if you come to a center, you can sit there and wait, and you can have a coffee. It's around the corner. We also have some snacks. They're patients stealing our snacks and eating all of them, and we don't care as long as they have a good time. But we do tell them about diabetes, so they should be a little bit careful. And so what we do is we go to, sometimes it's an old place, and we remodel it from the ground on, and we make it like a living room. And here you see the digital version. So we have a floor plan, and so for every center we go there and we make it really new, and they all look alike. And what we do at these centers is always comprised of three major building blocks. It's comprised of training, for example, brain training or bodily training, whatever training you need. We call it training and not therapy. I will explain to you later. We always do coaching. Nobody gets an intervention without having a coach. So we train therapists to become a coach. We have our own accredited course for this, and we monitor. Monitoring is very, very important, and we'll talk about all three building blocks now. If you have questions in between, feel free to interrupt. Yes?
Yes, I think you can hear me now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, hi, good morning. So I just wanted to ask earlier, you mentioned about a lady with the issue, the stroke. So was it a physical problem that she developed or neurological?
She had, so because of a neurological damage to the brain,
Yeah.
she developed mental problems, she developed neuropsychological problems like attention problems, and she developed motor problems. So she couldn't walk really right, she couldn't stand on one leg and so forth.
So then neurofeedback was used for the motor problem.
Neurofeedback, I mean, it's not a neurofeedback course today, but what you do with neurofeedback is you feedback a very basic brain state. How alert is the brain? How much information is being processed? So it's more the groundwork for all kinds of therapies. What we see in our patients, if we do neurofeedback, we increase the alertness, the information processing, which is reflected in both mental improvement and bodily improvement. And we use it as the groundwork for other therapies.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. It's like you're really fatigued and you drink a liter of coffee, and then you feel excited again. It also has some negative side effects, but that's what with neurofeedback, very gradually and slowly, you improve the information processing. If people have, what we see with stroke, for example, on the affected side, we have to increase information processing. And the unaffected side, some patients go into a stressful response, a neurophysiological response. So we decrease the brain activity. So you get a more balanced right and left hemispheric brain.
Okay.
Yeah. And with this, I wanted to show you that it's not a standalone therapy in our case. We always coach people and monitor them. So these building blocks are very important, and I would really like to urge you, if you do work also in research projects with medical data and with patients, try to increase compliance and quality of care, which I'm going to explain right now, in order to have real impact. So this is where neurofeedback and QEEG come into place. The QEEG we use for monitoring, much more about it later, and the neurofeedback we use as intervention. So it's very, very cool that you can use a measurement as an intervention, because as you do the intervention, you get the data and you can check the results. So neurofeedback is a very focused, quantitative approach. So this is our patient journey, and just this is where we come in. So as I said, you go to hospital if you have a stroke or real severe depression or some other disease. You go to rehabilitation, sometimes not, but at some time you get home, and then we come in and we use the blended care approach so that the patients don't fall into this hole, into this gap, this black hole, where they have not a lot of intensity and quality of care. So we try to minimize the gap by increasing the intensity so they have a seamless transition from going from in the clinic, work in the clinic, to at home. So it's actually a small clinic at their homes. So what did we learn when we set it up in these centers? Lesson 1, apps are out. We are now 100% organic. This is a joke, because we don't have to do anything, but I thought I'll pull off a joke. It's Friday, right? So it's Joking Friday. Apps are out, and the reason for that is that years ago, everybody started to do apps in medicine. I think the same thing happened in Asia, probably more even than in Europe. It happened so much that everybody developed an app for depression, for anxiety, for stroke. And what they do, they put the app on the market, they try to get a lot of money for it, and they publish results. What they don't publish mostly is the compliance. The compliance with apps only is really, really, really low. It is so low. With compliance, I mean that people actually use it the way it's intended to use, with frequency and intensity. The problem then is that insurance companies in Germany, they don't want to talk to us if we start with apps. So I had my first talks because to us it would be much, much easier if you just had an app, right, without the centers. They didn't want to talk to us because they knew the compliance was very low. And we see it in our own data. We had a clinical study. We did a clinical study during COVID. It was not planned as such, but because of COVID, we had to do it digitally. We compared people who were trained with an app and people who were trained with an app plus a coach, just someone who helps you using the app and sends you messages. The compliance with the app-only group was so low that we stopped the study. After 3-4 days, I stopped using it. And just imagine, after stroke or depression, you need months of training and improvement because they're very gradual improvements. You need to be motivated all the time. So lesson one is, we don't talk about apps. The app, we have an app, but it's a means of communication with the patient, which is something totally different. If you go to the app store, you look at our app, you can't do anything. You can't log in because you need to come to a center first, and then you get the login code, and then we connect to you via the app. And the app is, in our case, is the one-stop shop for us, where a patient at home or wherever he is can connect to us. And in the app, we're now redeveloping it. The messaging is central. You're always messaging, you're always in the chat. And via the chat, we talk to you, you get your exercises, you can do your neurofeedback training. So it's really the communication, inter-human communication is central to everything we do. So apps are out, forget about them. Here you see the neurofeedback app, by the way. So we use it, as I said, and it works brilliantly, of course. So the patient has a headband, we have a few with us, and they use the app. But as I said, it's a communication means. So we see when they're training and what the outcome was of the training. We see, so not just compliance, but also did they do a good job? Was the neurofeedback, was it successful? Did they improve their brain activity? Because the reason, if you go to a therapist or to a training or to a physician, you want to get better, you want to improve something. We're going to talk about our outcome measures later. And we always check if this happens, and we check it through our dashboard. So these are parts of our virtual clinic. In the dashboard, this is in German, by the way. You will see German and Dutch text, but it doesn't matter. We see the outcomes in EEG band. So we see what was the brain doing during the training, did it improve in between trainings? So it's very interactive. And on the left upper corner, we can see who is the therapist. So this is, for example, a neuropsychologist that works with us. We have a mix of occupational therapists, neuropsychologists, a lot of people from different disciplines work. Lesson 2, it's a very important one that we learned. If you want to create innovative solutions, they need to be healthcare system agnostic. And what I mean by that is that is also a mistake we made. You need to develop something that can be used in any country and any healthcare system. It's like Coca-Cola. They developed a syrup, and the syrup is being bottled by other companies and being distributed by other companies. Coca-Cola just does the syrup and the marketing. That means it's agnostic for the country where they develop it. And if you have a smart idea to improve, for example, chronic stress or to have a new therapy system, I would really urge you to think about healthcare system agnostic innovations. So we think about, for example, stroke coach for stroke patients or the neurofeedback treatment is the Coca-Cola syrup. And then we go and we see how can we adapt it so we get reimbursement in the Netherlands. We get a different system in Germany, but we can apply it also in Germany. We just adjust it so we get the same reimbursement. So the ISO certification in our case is about our service without the actual reimbursement. So it's the Coca-Cola syrup. That's what I mean by healthcare system agnostic. And this is this scheme. So I'm going to use my pointer. So on the left, you see we have the content. What we do is based on science as much as possible. So it's evidence-based. It's very data-driven. By the way, the patients don't experience that. They experience a very human interaction, but it's in our case, it's very data-driven. And it's very outcome-oriented. So we always have goals and we check if we achieve the goals. Nobody comes in our center and says, oh, let's do something for a year or for 6 weeks. It's very outcome-oriented. Then we implement it in the virtual clinic. We look at results, we offer it in the app, they come to us, the data being saved. And then after that, we check, okay, how are we going to offer it? We can offer it directly to patients via a center, or during COVID, we did it fully digital via the virtual clinic. They saw us via Zoom, for example, or Google Meet. So it's a different delivery model. And now we're talking to clinics that want to learn from us how they can do this blended care. So we teach them, they can use it, and it's a licensed model. So that everybody and as much patient can benefit from it as possible. So we don't have to do it ourselves all the time. And these things we learned were accelerated by COVID. I mean, the Netherlands is quite easygoing, Germany not so, but even in the Netherlands, COVID was a huge, huge problem. And there we learned lesson 3. And I think it's the most important lesson that we learned. We treat our patients as professional athletes. Actually, we publish results with the Sports University of Cologne, which is an elite university for Olympic athletes, where they are trained. Nike uses it as a research center, and they teach us, and we learn from them, and they learn from us how to coach patients as a therapist, as if they were professional athletes. So just imagine you had a stroke. Your life totally changes. You have mental problems. You can't walk. You can't do your stuff at home or at university. And now you have to improve, you have to get better, you have to train every day as if you were a professional athlete. You have to adjust your nutritional intake, you have to train your strength, your endurance, you have to do all these new psychological training techniques. In order to do so, you need to be motivated also as a professional athlete. So what we do, it's called positive health. It's a new movement in the Netherlands where we don't talk about your problems. We only talk, okay, this is where you are, you want to get there, so this is what we're going to do. It's very, very, very positive. We need to be in a good mood when we see our patients, even if we have a bad day. You have seen our centers, the design of it, it's very, very positive. So we try to adjust all the parameters in order to motivate patients as much as possible. And this is not always the case in medicine, as you can imagine. So motivation is key, and we put a lot of effort in motivation, and that's where the coaching comes in. So coaching is the thing that increases compliance and impact. That means our therapists, they all have the professional degree, but they have to do a course that we offer for them, and that's accredited in Germany, in order to become a coach. That means you help people get better and do the things they need to do. So the coaching is central, and it's partly talking to them, maybe calling them, but also messaging. The messaging is very important. Patients, if they have a question, they put it in the messaging, in the app, and we need to respond to them, so they know we're there for them. And this is what we then do with the monitoring aspect. So for motivation, we need motivation in order to be compliant, in order to see results. And we feed back the results to the patients. So we show them, in this case, there's a little bit of German, but it means rumination. So you have all these thoughts going on, concentration problems and sleep problems. These often go together, right? You wake up, when you have a lot of stress, you wake up at night because you have to increase activation in your brain, and your thoughts start going. You think, oh, why my thoughts are going, and what kind of problems do I have? So we measure these 3 things. And this is a typical patient with 14 neurofeedback. This is an actual patient, by the way, with 14 neurofeedback sessions. And here you see the questionnaires, sometimes short questionnaires, sometimes longer. So we have short ones to track progress. We have longer ones to do pre and post measurements. They're all validated questionnaires, by the way. And then we just hope to see that things get better. In this case, that you have lesser points on all these scales. So really aiming towards decreasing all these problems. Of course, it is really, really, if every patient was like this, I would be very happy. I'm also happy, but this is, of course, a very good patient. But we always look at changes, and I'll show you some other changes from studies that we do. And we had a lot of assumptions. This is a very old brain measurement, as you can see. We can sell it to you if you want, with a nice meter. We had a lot of assumptions, as we all have, and you're not always aware of your assumptions when you treat patients. And a lot of them were wrong, and COVID showed us that our assumptions were wrong. One assumption that everybody in Europe has is that elderly, all the patients, cannot do online stuff. They don't have a smartphone, and if they have, they don't know what push what buttons. And we also thought that was the case. It was not right. We have more problems with therapists doing online stuff than with our patients so far. we have, you can't see the picture. So we have elderly, if they have a smartphone, we can teach them how to connect to us and how to do it. The app we developed, you can't do any settings. You just press next and you go through the app and we tell you what to do. The virtual clinic that I told you before, we will be testing with patients. All they have to be able to do is use a mouse and click. If they can use the mouse and click, they can go to the clinic and we test all the steps in our software with our patients to see if they can use it. So patients can do almost anything. So we had online sessions during COVID where we did exercises with them. And the oldest man was a little bit over 90. So we had young people, old people all together doing online stuff. And there were lots of other assumptions that we had about patients. So what we learned is you have to test everything. And you have to start with very, very simple things. We never develop complicated things. We start with a very simple solution. And if it's okay, then we develop more complexity around that solution. So that's something I really would like to urge you to think about. And with this, again, referring to the old picture of the Netherlands, rehabilitation is very intuition driven. If you go to a psychiatrist, you come in, we have psychiatrists, very famous ones in Germany, and they told me, if the patient walks in, I already know what they have. I have so much experience. And this is intuition driven. It's not backed up by science, by the way, because in neurology and also in psychiatry, when you give medication, it's very random driven. You don't know what medication will work. You have to increase, if you don't see any workings, any effects, you need to increase the dose, then you change the medication and so forth. So we need to go from this intuition-driven approach in rehabilitation and in treatment to more data-driven. And for that, you need standardized measurements and standardized interventions so you can compare and can improve, and you need the certification. So I'm not a big fan of doing certification. It was a lot of work for us, but now we have a structure where everybody gets the same pre and post measurements, and we can actually compare data, and we can go more into personalized medicine as we already know it in oncology and cardiology. So in our case, as soon as you have a depression or stroke, you get into this old-fashioned intuition-driven approach, and it needs to be data-driven. And that's where the monitoring comes in. So you need to monitor effects of every treatment. Therapists that work alone in their own practice, but also in clinics. So, for example, clinics don't exchange information in Europe. They have their own questionnaires, their own paper. So if you want to do something with it, you have to drive in your little Proton. We don't have Protons in Europe, by the way. We love them because we drive in them here, the taxi. So you need to drive in your car and you need to go to all the rehabilitation centers, get all the paperwork and then do it in a spreadsheet or whatever. Nobody has ever done it. So the monitoring needs to be digital. It needs to be standardized, and it needs to be easy for the patients, not too intrusive. So not that the patient has to do 1 or 2 hours of measurements every week, they won't do it. So what it means for us, this data-driven approach, it means we start with evidence-based treatments, which makes it very, very simple. If you think about neurofeedback, there's a lot of protocols you can do, a lot of very not scientific-based protocols. If you look at the evidence, there are only a few protocols that have shown to be working. In stroke, if you look at how you train your body or your mind, there are only a few very simple approaches that need to be intense, but that work. So that's what we do. Then we need validated measurements and assessments. If you don't have a measurement that is validated by or backed up by some study, you need to do it yourself. So we are looking into other measurements that we think are more simple and more digitized for COVID, for example, if patients are at home and we need to validate it themselves. And if we do that, we get personalized medicine. That means based on the evidence and based on our intake, we decide which program is fit for which patient. The programs, so we have different kind of programs, and within the program, our software adapts so that you have always the desired intensity. So what is adaptive is the intensity and the type of program. And then very important, which a lot of researchers forget, it needs to be based on the concept of value-based healthcare. So we calculate for every euro, we have the euro in the Netherlands and in Germany, how much improvement in quality of life do we get per euro that we spend? And that needs to be a very good calculation. It means that needs to be a good ratio. So we have a much better ratio than a rehabilitation center, for example, because we cost less money and we have much more impact on patients' lives. So this is very, very important that we don't forget the monetary aspect of it. So we show insurance companies, look, we are healthcare agnostic. We can do it with a conventional reimbursement, but we get more impact on patients' lives. And what now happens is the insurance companies, after a few years, they come back to us and want to talk to us about more financing or other approaches for reimbursement. And what means is we are driven by data, but the patients don't feel it and don't see it. They are driven by the personal connection. So on the surface, you see the personal connection, but below we have all the data that drive the treatments and the pre-post measurements. How am I on time? Is it okay? Yeah, okay. So if you then look, we go back to EEG, QEEG and neurofeedback. So a little explanation, EEG are the brain measurements, the raw measurements that have been doing since the 1920s in Europe. And if you quantify it, for example, with frequency analysis or some kind of analysis, we put the letter Q in front of it. So it's quantitative EEG. And we can use it as a measurement, and we can use it as a treatment, which is called neurofeedback. And we always use it in this approach that you now see. So it's not a standalone treatment, it's embedded in the full patient journey. So if you measure the brain, we also have to know what is your problem. Are you hyperactive, or do parents of a child have the problem and the child itself not? Are you an adult? Do you have depression, anxiety? So we also quantify the mind state. So what is the state of mind? What is your problem? And can we see it in the brain? So is there a correlation between what we see in the brain and the problems you experience? And how's your environment? So are you a very hyperactive person standing and giving a presentation in an environment that's very, very easygoing every day? Or are you very fatigued and you are in an environment with lots of energy? Then you can get problems. So we do a pre-test consisting of questionnaires, validated questionnaires, the EEG, and then we quantify it. And of course, goal setting. So why are you here? You want to get better? If you don't want to get better, we can't do anything with you, right? We're not going to spend time and money on patients that don't want to have goals. And then you get the treatment, in this case, neurofeedback, and always combined with strategy training. We used to do neurofeedback in the past, just the treatment neurofeedback. But now, because of the input of therapists, Luana is here as a therapist, she did a lot of work on it. We use strategy training to improve the effects of neurofeedback and to teach patients how they can use the improved brain activity in their daily life, in their work, and on university, for example. And then we do the same measurements at the end here, where you have, again, the same questionnaires, the same brain measurements, but also integration strategies in everyday life. So it's always, the goals are set in a manner that you can use it. It can add to your quality of life in your daily life. Is this okay? Yeah? That's how it should be, I think. And then the role of these brain measurements, called QEEG, in the patient journey, we call it the patient journey. So we always look at the full journey. Otherwise, you're only looking at a certain aspect, and you don't know how other people can implement it. So the patient journey starts when they call you, or when they want to make an appointment, and it ends when they leave and you did your final evaluation. We even do evaluations 3 months, for example, after they left. First of all, it is a decision support and diagnosis. QEEG is not used as a diagnostic tool in Europe, but it's a supporting tool for diagnosis. So if I say I feel a little bit depressed, I've been feeling a little bit negative for the past 3 to 6 months, then we look at brain activity and we hope to see, or we're going to answer the question, what is happening in the brain? Do we see a pattern that we know from science correlates with my feelings, with my mood disorder? And if so, it is already therapeutic in nature, because we're going to explain to the patient, look, you feel sad, there's some reasons for it, and what we see in the brain is an underactivity or a lot of inhibition on your left frontal cortex, and this is a part of the brain where you have the behavior that goes outward. So if this is inhibited, your behavior is more inward, and you don't want to move around so much, and you feel not good, and so forth. So you get kind of awareness by the patient of what it means. And this is the first therapeutic step. And it is also supported treatment choice. So the QEEG, the buttons do work. I'm very happy. Yes. So if you have then the QEEG and we explain it to the patients, the QEEG also not only supports the diagnosis, but also supports the choice of treatment. If I have a depression and my brain is underactivated, I get medication or treatment that serves to activate my brain and my behavior. If I have a depression and this happens, and have a very agitated brain, so for example, having depression because of very, very high stress levels, then I need medication or treatment that lowers my brain activity. So the QEEG can support the choice of treatment. There are a lot of publications on that. So we see if it supports it and if it can predict it. And if we do that, then we have our neurofeedback treatment combined with strategy training. And the cool thing, as I said in the beginning, is that neurofeedback, all the data are always stored, so we can actually see if the EEG that we are training, if it changes in the direction that we want. So if we want to increase brain activity after depression, or for example, increase brain activity in ADHD, so that the hyperactivity gets a little bit lower, we can see if this actually change. And if needed, we can switch our treatment protocol. And this is really the basis of quality management in medicine. It's not to improve all kinds of things that already work, but to leave out the things that don't work. And a lot of people forget that. So we don't do any things that we see that have no effect, because otherwise the euro per quality of life index gets really bad. So we just leave out things. And the QEEGs are also the basis for the treatment itself. So if you have, for example, underactivity in ADHD or in depression, we show you that underactivity, and every time the activity increases, you get some positive feedback on your screen in our app. And that's the neurofeedback treatment. And we try to condition your brain in a direction that correlates with improved quality of life. So that's the neurofeedback treatment. And we're going to do a course next week. And in that course, you learn a lot about EEG, and the final 10% is neurofeedback. Because you need to know a lot about EEG, about profiling of the mind, and the EEG treatment itself is actually quite simple. So the basis is complicated, but the treatment itself is quite simple. And if you do the treatment, it's almost never a treatment by itself. It's a foundation for other things. Like if you have a depression, take medication, you still want to do some coaching or counseling or therapy. The same with neurofeedback. It's a foundation for other therapies. And there are some studies showing that if you do neurofeedback, for example, right before a rehabilitation intervention, for example, strength training or some mental training, then the training right after neurofeedback is much, much better because of the priming you do with the brain. And then at the end, we evaluate the treatment effects, which is also a lot of times forgotten. So we not only look if you feel better, but we also look at changes in physiology, and we try to combine it so we can learn and feed back in our quality management system. Okay, with this QEEG pattern, there are 50 patients showing that they do better with this and this intervention. So we can learn and improve our pattern. And that's the central part of the certification. So this is all embedded in the blended care model. We don't do anything anymore that cannot be done as blended care. So our philosophy is, if we buy equipment or develop equipment, it needs to be used at patients' homes. So you can imagine we don't use MRI scanners because you can't put an MRI scanner in a typical home of a Dutch citizen. We have small homes. But we do, if, for example, with Paul, we're now developing muscle measurements, EMG. You may have heard of it. So you put an electrode on your muscle, you flex it, and after a stroke, or for example, after depression, you have intense muscle activity, and you can see it on your app, and you can use it at home as kind of a feedback procedure. And also with a stroke, you can improve your movements. So everything we develop is not just for the centers, but also be used at home. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Actually, you talk about the early slide, patient journey. So at the beginning, at the beginning, when we collected data or see the patient brain, how is it working, and after the therapy, and after the therapy, at the end of the time, during the therapy, if the patient is not the normal, like sometimes if the patient is not normal, we cannot get the proper signal. So is there any alternative way to do the test?
I'm not sure I understand your question. You mean if the patient can't do the test at home?
No, even there at the therapist center, and the patient is not the normal. Like they have like the autism, some kind of disease they are suffering. So we cannot get the proper signal from them. At the time we are trying to get the signal, or at the time we are getting the data, at the time we cannot do it properly.
Okay, so if we have problems with measurements with a patient, I can assure you with every patient we get very valid measurements, and we have a lot of tricks to do it. I know the problems you're talking about. We have children who just pulled out the electrodes and ran outside. And I give you one example, what we learned. For example, if you have an autistic child, we give them electrodes at the first meeting. So we talk to the parents and the child get electrodes and they can take them home, 1 or 2 electrodes, and play with them. With a little gel, and they can put it on the skin. And the next time they come, they're not so anxious about the electrodes. What we also learned is not to use certain words in autism. So we don't tell them you're going to measure firing of neurons in your brain, because firing, and so it's very gamified. So we use different language. And if even with patients with movement disorders like Parkinson's disease, we have a lot of experience how to do very valid measurements. I've not seen a single patient we couldn't measure. So, but that's a lot of experience over the years. So we've been doing neurofeedback, I think, all since 14, 15 years, even longer. 2002 we started. Yeah, so it's a lot of experience.
Yes, the most of the thing happening, like when we put the cap on the like the patient and someone is not the normal, they try to shouting, crying, and they have to pull the electrode out. So that's the problem.
Yes, so I'm not sure if you're attending next week in our course, but that's what we teach people, how to deal with people who are a little bit more difficult. And that's a challenge, because if you can deal with them, you are fine with all the rest of the patients. It's not a science, that's an art of how you connect to people and how you put on electro caps. By the way, if they do, can you understand me? Okay. If you do it, if we don't give electro caps to people at home, they get these headbands where we do the prefrontal measurements, which are much easier to use. But still, it can be a problem. You can get noise, and so there are a lot of ways to deal with it. I can't give you a definite answer that answers everything, but I can tell you that we have never experienced a single patient we couldn't measure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
The time.
Okay.
I think that the time from the measurement is also a big point, right? We do a measurement that we takes, I think, 2 minutes, and so you get the time shorter to measure everything.
Also, if I do the time shorter, then it will be easy to handle the patient.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's a very good relevant comment. So first of all, if you come into our center, you've seen the centers, you feel warm, it's nice, and we have toys and everything. Children are also okay. But what Luana says, by the way, Luana is also a therapist working at our centers, and she is in the central coordinator of all the practices. If, for example, if you give a questionnaire, because it's not only for brain measurements, just imagine there are questionnaires, as you may know in psychiatry, for diagnostic purposes, that have more than 700 questions. So if you have a depression and you see 700 questions, your depression doesn't get a lot better, right? So also with a stroke, they have every patient, without exception, with a stroke has alertness problems. Even if they have no bodily problems, they have alertness problems. So if we give them a lot of questions, they're just going to zoom out, and we don't get the results we want. So we rather divide it into shorter fragments of questions that we give them over the weeks. So everything is about impact. What is the reason we want to have a measurement? Or so can we get the required information to have impact on the patient in 2 minutes, or in 5 minutes, or in 20 minutes? So in the Netherlands, if you do an EEG to get reimbursed, you need to do 20 minutes based on historical reasons from the 1970s, but we don't do that. So if it's 2 minutes or 2 times 2 minutes, to have eyes closed, eyes open, and a cognitive task, within 5 minutes they're done. And that's a big. So there are a lot of aspects surrounding to get a valid measurement. But you're right, if the measurement is not valid, you cannot train, you cannot use the EEG for all the reasons that I just mentioned. So the quality is very, very important. So if we do this blended care, it results in a lot of things, but 3 very important things. The number one thing that is not often published is increased compliance. And it's or adherence. Compliance means you do exactly what I tell you to do. Adherence means I adhere to the program, I more or less do what you tell me to do. We like the word compliance, we're a little bit more strict, because our data show that if we tell patients exactly what to do every day, they like it. They like to be motivated by very clear goals and therapeutic strategies. So we came from a very loose interventional scheme to very strict rules. I mean, we have a little bit of humor. If they complain, and they always complain, we make a few jokes and they still do it. So increased compliance is number one. We're now thinking together with the university about new measurements, how to measure compliance, because compliance means we get questionnaires, we get feedback from when they're at home. Compliance means also they do the neurofeedback treatment as much as we told them to do, but also as long as we told them to do. Compliance means they also stick to the program for a certain period of time, and they give us the measurements back at the end. They send the questionnaires and so forth. So a lot of aspects to compliance, but also increase intensity. So if we tell them we need 15 minutes of neurofeedback, and in addition, you need to do 200 squats per day after stroke, for example, they need to do the intensity because a certain intensity is needed to improve your quality of life. So we have increased intensity if they do the stuff they need to do at home and not just at our center. And we get an improved connection between therapist and patient. So we don't see each other just at the center. They know that we are with them digitally at home. And that means we have improved clinical effects, which is, of course, what it's all about. And to prove that, we need key performance indicators. And the key performance indicators are compliance, quality of life, and risk reduction of a few things I'm going to explain. So just if you see that we use QEEG and neurofeedback, the two words are not in here because it doesn't matter if I use neurofeedback to improve your quality of life or the coaching or whatever. It's all about the holistic approach. So we always measure compliance first. Do you stick to our program for a certain period of time? I'm going to show you some data. So we can see, here's a graph. For every neurofeedback treatment, we see the treatment effect. And the treatment effect is measured as the start of your neurofeedback training. For example, you train at 7 o'clock in the evening, and we see at 7:10 you have the best inhibition of a certain brainwave. Or if you want to improve certain brainwaves, you have the highest brainwave. And the difference between your best neurofeedback round and the first one, we call a treatment index. And we can see not only if you do a treatment or training at home, but also how good it was, what the effect was. So this is a compliance measurement. And here we now publishing a result on messaging coaching to a therapy. So you do a therapy and we coach you via messaging. And you get messages, hey, you're in the 3rd week of treatment, well done. Or if you have a question, we answer and so forth. And what you see, these are just, all the dots are subjects, just in a linear way. And on the left-hand side, you see the percentage of trainings that they actually did what we told them to do in a 6-week period. So what you see is it's 120 patients, and there's a highly significant effect p-value less than 0.003, and you see that more patients with the messaging are in the upper quadrant. So they're more compliant, 72% on average, than the patients without the messaging, the app only. And remember, these are patients that we have never seen. So this was just trying to quantify the messaging effect in patients that are fully digital. They never seen us, they're onboarded, and we didn't have a video call, nothing, just had the messaging and the app. So we already know that even in these patients, we have an effect of messaging as coaching. We also assess the quality of life. This is very important for the patients, but also for the insurance companies. That's what we need to show the insurance companies, that we have a certain increase of quality of life. So during COVID, during lockdown, we did this digital blended care approach with stroke patients because they couldn't go to rehab centers, and we offered them the treatment approach. So it is still blended care because we saw them over video, which is more or less as in practice, and we coached them while they were doing the exercises with an app. And quality of life, we use, it's called the short form 36, the most used quality of life index, I think, worldwide. And it has different aspects of quality of life. And what we see is the biggest increase. We're going to publish the results, so there's no significance here, but it's very significant. This is with 92 patients. We see the highest increase in energy and fatigue after a 6 to 3 month program. They get more energy, more energetic. They feel better. They also have mood improvements, which we didn't expect, and they have improved physical functioning. So even during COVID, when they couldn't come to us, but we came to their house, so to speak, digitally, we had very significant effects that are much higher than a typical rehabilitation center or just a physical practice. So we are very happy with these results. And the third one is risk reduction. So we not only want to improve quality of life, we also want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And it can be a recurrent stroke, can be a depressive episode, can be just a return of the problems came to our practice, because most of the things that people come with can return if they don't adjust their lifestyles. So, for example, a big indicator of risk for a stroke of any disease, chronic disease, is blood pressure. So here you see from the same 92 patients with a stroke, you see the average, not the blood pressure, but clinical alerts. So because we do clinical relevant things, we're not interested in the blood pressure as a value. I mean, we have them, but we report the alerts. So as soon as your blood pressure goes above 140 or above 160, above 180, you get a medical alert, and the amount of alerts and the average amount of alert it goes down during the coaching trajectory. So if we train with the patients, if they do their training, we see that blood pressure lowers during a 3-month period. This is the group average. And what we now very fond of is that this not only leads to blended care, but also to blended research. And we got the approval of the Medical Ethical Committee in Germany to publish all our observational data from our centers. That means if patients come to our center and they train with neurofeedback or they train at home, this approach where we save our data can be used for publications. So we don't have the time, but also we're not a university, so we can give the data now anonymized to universities and they can publish it. And this means that we always wanted to do this and we were not able to until this year, where we got the green light. That means that just imagine you go to a clinic in Malaysia, any clinic, and all the data you can use for research. You can just look at it and see if there are patterns, if you could have predicted some outcomes. And I call this blended research. Not sure if it's a real term, but I thought for today we can just coin it. Because it's blended, you blend the clinic and the research. So we learn from universities because we get the outcomes of the data and we provide them with new data. And we don't have to write medical ethical applications all the time. Because of the certification that we have in all our practices and the fact that it's all standardized, we can use anonymized data for research. This is in Germany and Switzerland. So in Switzerland is very, very, very strict with privacy regulations. I now learned that Asia is even stricter medical ethical. The strictest regulations are in the Philippines, not sure why, but after that, Switzerland is very strict, so, and we still are able to use it. This is, of course, brilliant because real data can be used for research. So if what we now have for example, we did randomized clinical trials as the one you saw with the messaging. It's never the real situation. The randomized clinical trial is great to see differences between groups, but it's not really applicable to real life because in our centers we have all kinds of differences. We have lots of variation of patients, but this is where the music is in there, as we say in the Netherlands, right? There's music in these data, so we have all these variable data, but lots and lots of data, and they can now be used from this observational design for publication or research.
Yeah, because I know that especially in Switzerland, Europe, data are very strict. They normally control. Even I remember years ago, we were trying to have a patient record system. In the US they have already done it, but in the Europe, it's not allowed to even have a patient record system. So I'm not sure because in this particular case, you have to have it unanimous, right?
Yes, it is unanimous, and we have a privacy officer who helps us with it. So it's not an easy thing to do. That's the first thing. We have to store, for example, the Swiss data on a Swiss server, German data on a German server. And what we do, you make an anonymized copy of everything, and then you can use them for research. But only after you have green light from the medical ethical committee.
Okay. Yeah. So in other words, we do have to apply for the ethical, the local one even in that particular case.
Yes. So, but to use our data, we don't need any application anymore.
Okay. Oh, no more.
No more. Okay. So the day-to-day data from our centers can just be used for publications. Yeah, which is good. So it's very exciting. Besides that, we also have our typical research projects, which are now much more clinical than in the older days, which was very technical. But we really want to focus on the impact and use other people like you with lots of technical insights to help us have more impact on the patient perspective. So this is where the blended research comes in, and we're really happy that we can do it. And
yeah,
yes,
the blended here means also refers to both the EEG and also the psychological data.
yes, and blended means not just research, but clinical and research together. So what we really like is that we have our day-to-day outcomes, not in a research format, but just as they happen in centers and at patients' homes, because it's already structured, to use that as input for research. So it's very clinical applicable, and it's real-life data, and that's what we call it blended. But it's both data from a center and from patients' homes.
And also the EEG data and the psychological.
Yeah, we have the questionnaires, we have the mind state, brain state, yeah, the full patient journey. So we have local publications now in Germany. We not only publish scientifically, but also really in therapeutic journals, so that therapists can learn from our approach, even if they work. I mean, you can even implement it in a small practice if you want to, and if you take a little bit of time. We do pre and post measurements and use the online approach. Not a lot of people do it, but we still publish it. And that's how we also attract therapists to come and work for us or with us, and to spread the news. So knowledge transfer is really the number one thing we want to do after improving patients' lives. Then another lesson is Go Dutch. Here you see the beautiful windmills with some tulips. I think they're tulips, yeah. So another lesson we learned is you need to do it the Dutch way if you want to do something innovative. The Dutch way means just start doing it and make all the mistakes you can make without affecting patients' lives, by the way. That's what we always try. But you just need to start. If you would have done it the German way, we first would have been planned. We would have been planning in the planning state for 10 years. And in 10 years, a lot of things changed. But that's why we could adapt really fast. Within a few days, when COVID hit and we had the first lockdown, we transferred to fully digital because we already had it ready. And we just started doing digital therapy with patients. And so new things, we are always trying new things. We're now starting a new project in Aachen, together with Luana and other therapists, where we use the blended approach for children with behavioral disorders and ADHD, but we're going to also train the parents. So we're going to train parents and coach parents how to deal with your child in the home situation. So they come in the center, then they go home and have to practice every day. And it's going to be the same program. It's always, all our programs are 6 weeks until a year. And in this format of 6 weeks, where after 6 weeks you change your intervention, we're going to do now this approach where we not only have adults, but also children. We can do EEG, neurofeedback, but also help parents dealing with the child in the home situation. So it's also blended care from that aspect. And we're going to try it. We're not sure if it's successful. We think it is. There's some research backing it up. But we're just going to start in a small branch in one center. So we can try things in certain centers. And if they're successful, it can spread through the centers and hopefully to other people too. So that's what I mean by Go Dutch. It also means that you have to share the payment after you have dinner. But this is not what I meant. And come and have a look at our windows. They're really cool from 17th century. And then the final lesson we learned is that it's always about people. And sometimes we forget that you are in a very technical department. We become with a very technical mindset in the past, but we more and more realize that the human interactive aspect is very, very important. For example, this is Wiebke, our colleague from Germany. We train therapists to come and work for us and to become a coach and to become very interactive and have lots of human skills. And we take care of our therapists. So if you have a center, the therapists can get a share in the center so that they become partner in what we do. And we now have, with help of an American coach, we're going to coach the therapist how to have an excellent patient journey. So if the patient comes in, what do you tell them? How do you answer the phone with hello? What's your intonation? What will you tell them? What happens, as you said in the example, what if you have a patient that really annoys you until the final cell of your body, right? That happens. What if you have a really bad day and you still have to go to the center and you feel not well, but you have to be motivating for the patients? How do you do that? So how do you make sure that the patient is always listened to, and how you can improve their life? And we do that with Wiebke. And the best thing that can happen is that we also do it with patients. Here you see our therapists. So they work out it was just one picture, right? It was not a big workout. But in our course, it's theoretical, but also practical. We go outside, we train with the therapist, so they have to experience what the patient experiences. If they do neurofeedback and QEEG, they have to do the measurement with themselves. You have to experience what neurofeedback means. You can't do neurofeedback with the patient. I mean, research is a little bit different, but even then, all the research we did in the past, Paul and I, we always tried it ourselves. I did lots and lots and lots of neurofeedback training myself in order to feel what is it like to sit for 50 minutes or 30 minutes even with electrodes and look at a screen and do I get a headache? What should my chair be? Should it be inclined? Should I drink before? Should it be late at night? Should it be early in the morning? What are the differences? So we experience it ourselves. And after they finish 1 year, this is an Urkunde, this is a certificate, for example, for our stroke patients. If they finish our program for a year, they get a certificate. They never get a certificate, nowhere in a hospital, but we give them a certificate and they like it. They post it on Instagram. Hey, I'm now, I ended the stroke coach program. And we're now thinking of even organizing 2 or 3 days, like a larger event, wasn't possible during COVID, where therapists and physicians, but also patients come together, and we have workshops, we have like this, we have meetings, we have conversations, and so we have like a small summer school, just with the purpose of motivating patients to go back home and do what they need to do to improve their life. Nobody does it, and we think it's very important. We're also working on a glossy, like the Vogue, where you see all the fashion stuff. We are making a glossy for patients, for stroke patients in particular, because they always read this very negative, depressive information. It's always designed really bad. It's about problems and what can happen to you. And we now have interviews with people who teach us how to cook a meal, which is healthy for you. I mean, you know much more about it than we in the Netherlands, I think, because we have dinner here and there's a lot of breakfast. So it's very good and healthy. And we're also going to teach people, if you have motor problems, how to dress yourself in a way that you feel good, that's motivating. You don't need to look shitty if after a stroke or if you have a depression, but start improving your posture, how you dress, and so forth. So that's all. The glossy is also motivating. It has the same look and feel as our centers. It's all about positive motivation, because all the negative stuff they get all the time in other centers. So this is very important. What then happens is that one of our first patients, here she is, Jenny, she also had, I think, 5 strokes or something, a lot of strokes, couldn't talk really well, difficulty moving, and she improved so much in our program that she wrote us an email and said, hey, I want to work for you. So we told them, yes, you have a job. I didn't know what she could do, but we hired her. And she's now doing our social media campaigns because she's very fit with social media. And not only that, she improved so much. Right here, she gives talks. This was a talk for the German Stroke Foundation. So who can better explain what we do to patients than a patient herself? So we hope to onboard more patients, and we want to make patients coaches so they can coach other people to increase motivation. So this is the best thing that can happen. That's really the final lesson, that if you do it for patients and for people and have a good relationship with people on the same eye, what is called the eye height, which is not always the case in Europe. It's very hierarchical, right? If a chief physician comes, he looks down at you as a patient and you need to do blah, blah, blah. And this is not the case in what we do. So this is really fun to do. And we collaborate more and more with patients. And this was the final lesson we learned. And I want to thank you for your attention and ask if you have any questions. I can answer. I try to answer everything. Could be technical, could be social, could be about the food in the Netherlands.
Any question?
Yeah, I have a question at Raini. Björn, regarding the digital therapy and then the apps that you mentioned just now, when we go to a digital version, how about the workload of the therapies?
Yes, so I can tell you what a day looks like from a therapist, because that is where the workload is in. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning, you come in the center, and in the first 30 minutes, you look at patients if there are any messages, for example, with the coaching. And the first 30 minutes, they reply to messages, or they have time to reply to anything that happened at home the day before at patients' homes. And then they have the therapist in the center. And at the end of the day, they have again 30 to 60 minutes where they look at the messages and the coaching and do the coaching. So we need to do the coaching within the working hours. And that means they have less direct hours with patients, but therefore they have more digital time. And it could be, I mean, during COVID, we only had digital time. But then if you do it really well, you can scale up to more than 100, 200, 300 patients if you're a really good coach at a time that you follow. And we want to use more artificial intelligence because certain messages can be sent at a certain point in time without you as a coach doing it. So we have a database of messages. But the thing is, as soon as you get a personal question or respond, you need to have also personal response. And we want to be honest. Patients have to see when you are answering as a therapist or not. So the workload is always, I mean, we have to take care of therapists. So the workload needs to be within the normal hours. But in general, what we now experience is that the workload for seeing therapists, patients at the center is higher than the workload if you coach people online. Because they come in and you have to talk to them, do the therapy all day long. So it's quite a high workload normally in a center.
Yes. How long does it take for when they go to the center? The patient will be entertained for
Yes, typically it's 1 hour. And we also have group therapy sometimes. So then it's 1.5 hours. But it's 1 hour maximum normally. And to be honest, if you do neurofeedback training or EEG, for example, the question is the attention span is so low after an hour that you don't want to extend the hour. And the training is very short at home. We rather have multiple short bursts of training of 15 to 20 minutes than 1 hour training at home, because then the compliance will be lower. So there's always this sweet spot between time and intensity and compliance.
These therapists, what are the kind of people? How are they being trained as a therapist?
Yeah, so the background is always they need to be lots of them are occupational therapists, because the reimbursement for neurofeedback, for example, in Germany is through occupational therapy, which is strange, but it's the case. Same in the Netherlands. And then we retrain them to become a coach. So they learn the different aspects. For example, neurofeedback, the full course is 2 weeks, but we typically have 4-day course. So they learn the basic aspects of it. And then we have the coach program. So we coach them to coach people. So we do case studies with them individually. We also have groups, online groups with therapists where we talk about different cases and more difficult patients. And it's ongoing. Because they're employed by us, they can attend and we give them the time to attend. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Madiha. I'm interested to know if there is a chance for elderly people with major stroke. Yeah, I wonder if the cases that you mentioned today, is it just mild stroke or major stroke for people with, bedridden?
Yeah. So we started out with in and exclusion criteria, of course. And inclusion is you need to be able to walk around 10 meters with or without walking aid, no matter how long or how slow you do it, but you need to be able to walk. Now we are going into the more severe stroke cases together with the University of Basel. Together with them, we develop the programs with coaching for people who can't even walk. So we did the severe cases. What we don't do, the effects are less in the blended care approach if patients have real severe cognitive deficits. So if they don't know why they should do it, we can teach their partners to help out, but we'd rather not do it so far. So severe other neurological diseases or psychiatric diseases are exclusion criteria so far.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to ask what kind of conditions actually were best affected or solved by neurofeedback?
Okay, very good question again. Sometimes we don't know, but if you look at research, sometimes we have surprises. I'll tell you the surprises. But research, the most backup is for ADHD. So in ADHD, you see a lot of improvements with randomized clinical studies. Years ago, they were not so well designed. Now they're better designed. So ADHD is the number one. Very simple protocols, actually. We are more also into neurology, and we see very striking results in Parkinson's disease, where we measure and we train patients in a way that they have less tremor, and the motor control improves, and also their cognitive skills. We don't know exactly why. What we do know is that in Parkinson's we see really very very prominent changes in the EEG. So it looks like if you see real changes in the EEG, then you could change it with neurofeedback. So you have ADHD, Parkinson's disease, stroke is not that much research. We have to publish it ourselves. And what happens there? There are learning disabilities in general, and depression are some studies, anxiety disorder are some studies, smaller ones, I must say. But what happens is you don't treat depression and you don't treat ADHD, you improve the information processing. Because you can only train what you can measure with EEG, right? If I measure my blood pressure and I show it to you live, or you see your own blood pressure, you can control it until a certain degree. And the same is with EEG, you can control it to a certain degree, and you only can control what we measure. What we measure is the central arousal of the nervous system, so the central activation level. So in some pathologies, we know that decreasing the level of activation of your brain is a really good thing to do. You improve your mental capabilities. And in other cases, you increase the level of activity of your brain. And these are the cases. So with depression, we typically have less activation. With ADHD, also less activation, although they act hyperactive. And with Parkinson's disease, we have very high activation. So we are really interested also in the stress responses and the chronic stress and the burnout. The problem with the studies is not the neurofeedback or the EEG, but the big variability in how you do a diagnostic procedure. So if you have problems and you come to psychiatrist one, the first one says you have depression, the other one says no, it's anxiety, and the third one says no, it's ADHD, and he can't deal with it, and that's why he has a depression. So it's primary ADHD. And this variability makes it very difficult to look at the studies in a more objective way. But these are sort of pathologies. Did I forget any? No, didn't forget it. These are the major pathologies that we treat. Yes.
I have a question.
Hello.
My name is Mazna. It's very interesting the way how the healthcare settings is. I'm not so very clear about whether this is like a government healthcare program, or is this like a private healthcare program? So or is this done or implemented to all healthcare institutions in your country?
Yes, so what we do is, that was my slide, we develop everything as if it is healthcare agnostic. So we develop it so we can implement it in the Netherlands and in Germany. So we do very innovative things, but we implement it in a very, in just the typical setting in medicine, so we can get reimbursement. Because in Europe, people are not very used to paying for healthcare. In the Netherlands, you get everything from the government. So it needs to be in a way implemented that we get reimbursement from the government. In Germany also, some patients pay themselves, by the way, but most patients just go through our centers, and through the centers we have the normal reimbursement. So that's the Dutch way, which I meant. We innovate and we implement things, but we have the typical old-fashioned reimbursement, so we can actually offer it to the patients. Does that answer your question?
Meaning it's done all across the country?
Yes, yes. In 3 countries now. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So when you talk about the virtual clinics, I was thinking about the brain marker. So how to make sure the patient know the correct place? But then when look at your slide, I think the patient were Muse, is it?
Muse and Euro, they're different ones. Yes.
Oh, okay, but still under control. I mean the therapy is online, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible to do it alone without the therapist, or it's considered dangerous?
Everything is possible in this world. We have bad experience. So, for example, if you have an electrode with gel, that you know, the conventional electrodes, we tried it in the past, and it's a big mess. People don't know where to put it, how to clean the skin, and so I would never recommend it. I would also never recommend doing neurofeedback without a therapist checking it from a distance. And the reason is, even if you have a headband, for example. Last night we had a nice dinner with the developer of the headband in Singapore. He came over to visit us, and we showed him the signals, and he was amazed by the quality of the signals of his own headband. They never saw it. He didn't think they would get, because they're really good signals. The thing is, you need to put it on in a certain way, and we need to teach patients, and we have videos for them, and you have to teach them how to do it so you get a very clean signal, because the cleaner the signal, of course, the more impact you have from your neurofeedback treatment. Otherwise, you're just looking at noise and training your noise level. And patients get sloppy after few treatments, so you have to come back in the center, and you have to show them again, and you have to show them online. So it's always backed up by a therapist in our case, in order to have the maximum impact. So we're not a big fan of people just buying equipment and doing it themselves at home, because first of all, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're trading. They didn't get a pre-measurement. And so it's more the wellness domain that they are looking at. And we really use it for the clinical domain. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Any last questions? It's 11:25, perhaps.
Oh.
One last question.
There's no question.
Okay.
Your headband, do you normally have it on rental, or your patient will buy them? And
Yeah, what we do, we try to buy it ourselves. For every center has headbands, and then we give them to patients so they can use it at home. Some patients want to buy it themselves, so they buy it, and then they get the treatments over the normal reimbursement. But typically, we don't want to bother them with it, and we give it, and we get it back after that. Sometimes it goes wrong. We also have blood pressure devices. One patient sent us back a very old blood pressure device that we did give them to them, and they kept the new one. But I mean, on the level of a lot of patients, we're not going to bother with individuals. I mean, if you look at the patient experience, it's the best experience that you get the headband, you go home, and we offer the full service. So but we don't sell it, because if we sell it, we are becoming a medical device company with all kinds of complications. So they just get it for the time they get it there.
Sorry, Hi Björn, sorry. I just wanted to ask, the headband, is it expensive for the patient to buy?
Yes.
Yes.
It's
okay.
no, I have to go to ringgit, right?
Ringgit.
Ringgit. It's about 2,500 ringgit, just the headband. And so if we buy it from a center, we have tax, we can have tax deductions, and it's a little bit cheaper for us, and we can reuse it if we clean it. And that's why we really want to offer it as part of the therapy.
So meaning that when they buy the headbands, is it come together with the package of the therapy session?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
They just come to us, they say, hey, I have ADHD, or whatever they say.
Okay.
And we start the measurements, the questionnaires, the EEG measurement, and we explain them the headband, and they take it home and then do the therapy with it. And the new ones are really, really better. Last night, that's why we want to meet him, because we don't want to work with multiple headbands. I want to have one partner who's really good. The new headbands have the EEG CE certified chips in them, but also with GPS, also with 3D accelerometers, with blood flow measurements. So the new ones, the new generation that's coming out now, is really, really well. So also the data, it's high quality data. They're even CE certified for this purpose, for the EEG purpose, and that's why we would be willing to give them and not sell them all. But they're quite expensive. But for example, in Switzerland, people have a lot of money, as you may know, and they just buy. They're probably going to buy it themselves. Yeah.
Is all Bluetooth?
Yes, it's all Bluetooth. Yeah. We brought some, so we're going to show you next week.
Next week. Next week.
Next week. Yes, it's a cliffhanger. Oh, we can show you. Do you have a bandwidth? We can show you right now, but we're going to measure next week. We're going to use it for the measurement. So I can show you what it looks like. This is the Muse headband, by the way. Muse is a Canadian company, and Neuro is a Singapore company, which I like much, much more. We have really good signals with it. And what strikes me is that these companies, they only have technical people working for them. They have no knowledge about EEG. They just do the technology, and then they hope for the best. And we show them that if you have the right conditions and measurement conditions, you actually can have a really good EEG. So it was a big surprise last night. This is a Muse. They're basically all the same. Thank you. They just did a few tricks. It's conventional. So this is a headband. have to make it larger because my head is 33.5 centimeters, which is a lot. So you put it behind your ears, and these, I don't want to put it now because I want to show you. These are the electrodes. So you have two measurement electrodes and a reference, two reference electrodes, and you have here. This is actually conductive material behind the ears. So you have the ground behind the ears. So it's really conventional EEG approach in a headband. And because they only measure the prefrontal cortex, of course, but most of the psychological problems are also visible in prefrontal cortex, also in different locations, but this one primarily. And you don't have any here in the prefrontal cortex, so that makes it a really good spot to measure for headbands. And that's why they're so successful. So the Neuro has other electrode material, and therefore I think a little bit better connectivity. But this one is okay. So you put it on and it connects via Bluetooth.
No gel.
No gel. But you do have to clean the skin, which I forgot to tell you. So if you clean the skin a little bit with alcohol, then you have much better. Also behind the ears, you have much better connectivity and you have a much better signal. Then you have to try it, and you can use it. I mean, we took care of the signal analysis process in our app. So for example, we reduced the sample frequency, so we don't measure the noise of the net, of the electricity. So it's not used for big clinical research. So if you do clinical research, you want to have a high sample frequency and see a lot of the signal. But if you use it for neurofeedback, and we're interested, for example, in waves until 30 hertz, or waves until 20 hertz, we're not going to sample 250 times, so we can reduce it, so we don't have a lot of noise in it. And we have some, and we can talk about it next week also, what kind of tricks we use with the bandpass filters in order to get the signal we want. And then the patient just, our neurofeedback application actually is a YouTube video. So you can select your videos, you're going to see it next week. And the YouTube video you selected gets smaller and bigger according to the brainwaves we are training. So you take your favorite video, which is really cool for kids. They look at the video, and if the brainwaves are the way they're supposed to be, the video gets larger. So we can train maximum of 2 parameters, left and right, or one side 2 brainwaves. And then one parameter is the vertical scaling, and the other one is the horizontal scaling. And the 2 combined make your YouTube video larger. And so the only thing we tell them to do is to become happy when YouTube increases, when they see more of the video. And then we have this conditioned response that we hope that the video becomes open more. And the algorithm behind it adjusts it every time. So every time you put it on, you close your eyes for 30 seconds and we measure your basic brain activity. And then neurofeedback starts with the state of that day. So if you're a little bit fatigued or if you're really, really active, the levels, so the thresholds, they adjust. So you always have the right intensity, what I also said in the presentation, of that day. It's the same as an athlete who trains with his trainer. Some days you have hard training, sometimes it's a little bit less. Yes, I see your finger at the bottom. That means you have an intent to ask a question.
One. Okay, Björn, can you show maybe can you tell us more a little bit on what is the example of the what you call the forgot the name of this neurofeedback. Yes, neurofeedback example activity. Neurofeedback is the activity that you have done with the patient.
What would you like to see?
The example of the neurofeedback activities that you have shared, or maybe you have therapy session conducted with the patient.
You want to see a video? Want to see data? Want to see the EEG? You want to see the outcomes?
The activities that you do with the patient.
Next week.
Oh, next week. Okay.
Oh, you mean the real neurofeedback session?
Yeah.
Next week.
Next week you're going to tell me, stop with all the, don't show me again. No, we're going to do it a lot next week. Yes.
Okay.
But what you see, as I said, it's really looking at YouTube. You select a video, and we have a layover over YouTube, so it gets smaller and increases and decreases from size. So the becoming larger and smaller is the neurofeedback. It's a real live depiction of what happens in your brain. Like if your blood pressure increases, if you would hook it up to blood pressure, if the blood pressure increases, then it would go up or down, whatever your direction of treatment is. It's that simple. That's it. We don't use any animations, or we only use that. Yeah.
So, Björn, what happened if during the QEEG session, the first QEEG session, suddenly you found that this particular patient may have a problem other than the prefrontal? So, in that case, you cannot use this device. So is there
That's true. Yeah. Sometimes you'll see in the course, we have some examples where patients, for example, during neurofeedback had an epileptic seizure. So we see the signal. Then you need to stop. They need to come back to the center, and we readjust. Because you're right, in the first anamnesis, in a typical patient journey, you get more and more information the longer you interact with the patient. You seldomly get all the information in the first intake. So then we adjust the therapy, and they need to come back, and we need to talk to them about what we could do.
So home therapy may not be possible in this case.
In case of epilepsy, it is possible, by the way. But if we see, for example, that there are severe psychiatric problems, then we would stop the therapy and go more into real, what it's called, psychiatric interventions, neuropsychological intervention. It could be, yes.
Okay, so it's been tested on epilepsy before, the neurofeedback.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that before. It was there are a lot of publications on epilepsy, also in Germany, two universities, because epilepsy, you really see very severe changes in the brain during a seizure. But what's much more interested, the past years, the research shows that before a seizure, your brain is starting to increase the pressure more or less, and the energy, electrical potential energy. At a certain point, there's too much energy, and it has to release the energy, like a volcano or an earthquake, and that's the seizure. So the seizure is your brain's response to this increased activity going on in your brain. It needs to release this in order to come back to this, as they call the homeostasis, a normal state of the brain. So what they now do is to look in between epileptic seizures to see if they can see this increase in brain activity. And as soon as you see it, you're going to feedback it. So every time your brain is a little bit less excited, you get positive feedback, so that your brain learns how to be in a more calm state, so that the same trigger doesn't result in an epileptic seizure. And it's called, for the people who are interested, SCP training, slow cortical potentials. We'll talk about it also in the course next week. And the same goes for migraine, by the way, which is a headache that's so severe that it looks like an epileptic seizure. So it has the same, it looks almost the same in the EEG.
Okay, and that's it. It's 11:37.
One more.
Only 1 hour 40
I can't
minutes.
stand anymore. I have to sit down.
No, I think it's time for you to sit
Oh,
down.
I have to sit.
Okay. Right, so great. Thank you, Björn, for the interesting and fruitful session. I shall be looking forward to having you again in the future. Thank you very much as well for the organizers, Office of Responsible Research and Innovation at ICT, the Research Unit 2, Pervasive Computing for Brain Development Group, CBDG, as well as the ICT IT Unit. Thank you everyone for your participation in this seminar. We hope to see you again next time, inshallah. Let's end with the speaker of our class. Before we dismiss, of course, we need to have a photo session. First, we'll do the Zoom one. And after that, for us, we'll gather around the staircase just outside the conference room. Okay, so we want to turn on.